A lot of factors go into making it to the top of the wrestling business. You need the right in-ring skills, the right gimmick, the right push from the right promoters, and that's just the in front of the camera stuff. You gotta stay in shape, you've gotta avoid injuries, deal with travel, hotels, crazed fans. You've gotta make sure your social media doesn't get too randy. But even if you do all those things right, there could still be other talents looking to cut your legs out from under you for a variety of reasons. The term generally used in the industry is backstage politics, and they can easily wreck a young up-and-comer's career. I'm Senior Siete for 7 Wrestling. Let's take a look at 7 wrestlers who tried to sabotage other wrestlers' careers. Now, before we get into this, we appreciate your support, so if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and Kona Crush that notification bell. Also, by popular demand, we've got the Brother shirt available for all of you 7 Wrestling Maniacs. It's a great way to support the channel and show your love for the Brotherhood. Oh, and of course, like Matthew Broderick's 90s revival of How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying, women are more than welcome to join the Brotherhood as well. Number 1. Stiff as a board. It was kinda weird when Hulk Hogan was slated to defend the WWF title against The Undertaker at the 1991 Survivor Series. Since its inception in 1987, the Survivor Series had always been the show where teams of 5 strive to survive. Or teams of 4, but you know, that didn't rhyme. But here we were, the Hulkster squaring off against the Dead Man. However, we weren't too worried about the Immortal One's chances because it seemed pretty clear that he was scheduled for a date with Ric Flair at WrestleMania 8. And surprise of surprises, when the Nature Boy would show up at ringside, slip a chair onto the mat, and The Undertaker would tombstone the Hulkster right onto it to claim his first WWF title. We'd later learn this was all a setup for an emergency pay-per-view known as Tuesday in Texas, where Hogan would get his rematch. Tuesday in Texas was an experiment by the WWE to see how people would respond to pay-per-views on a Tuesday. The answer was, not particularly well. But back to the Survivor Series. The afternoon of the match, Hogan had gone out of his way to reach out to The Undertaker to let him know that he had been having some neck issues and that he'd appreciate it if he was extra careful when hitting him with his finishing maneuver. Then, he made it a point to remind Taker of this several times throughout the day. Well, toward the end of the match, The Undertaker would drop Hogan with the move and, oh, he's fine. And he totally just stood up after being hit with the man's killer finisher. Wow, what an asshole. On the positive side, he's fine. But remember, the tombstone that ended the match took place on a steel chair. The Undertaker would describe what happened next on ESPN in a May 2020 interview. He'd say, we'd go into the finish, Flair comes down, slides the chair down, I pick Hogan up, and when I tell you I had the brother secure, he was secure. Boom. I give him the tombstone. Soon as my knees hit, I hear, ow, you got me, brother. I was 24, 25 years old, and I just crushed Hulk Hogan. That's what's going through my head. They gave me this opportunity, they gave me the chance to run with the ball, and I just hurt the golden goose. I'm just devastated. Mortified. Now, keep in mind, this is not Decade of Destruction, locker room leader, sitting judgment over wrestler's court Undertaker. This is a young guy who'd only debuted a year earlier. If he seriously injured Hogan, after Hogan told him to take care of him, his career would be donezo. Hulk Hogan claimed that his neck had been injured by the tombstone during the finish and went to the hospital. However, Shane McMahon told The Undertaker that Hogan's head didn't touch the chair during the maneuver. An understandably stressed Undertaker didn't believe him until he actually got to watch the footage. Now, this obviously puts The Undertaker in a real delicate situation, considering Hogan is making a big scene, and Taker's pretty sure he's lying. Taker would say, I was like, Terry, I watched it back, your head never hit. He was like, well, brother, what it was, you had me so tight that I had nowhere to move, and that's what jammed my neck, because I couldn't move at all. From this Tuesday in Texas, when I got that answer, I knew all I needed to know about him. And then, you know, that's the way my radar was always up anytime I had to interact with him. Wait a minute. Are you accusing Hulk Hogan of lying about something? The same Hulk Hogan who at WrestleMania 3 tore every muscle in his back while slamming the 1,000-pound Andre the Giant in front of 200,000 people at the Pontiac Superdome? 3 days before Andre the Giant died? Yeah, and that's the same Hulk Hogan who tells two very different stories about this phantom tombstone. In his first autobiography, Hollywood Hulk Hogan, Hogan says, "Undertaker hit me with a pile driver on the top of the chair and took away my title. He also screwed up my neck something fierce. It wasn't his fault, he took care of me and made sure my head didn't hit the mat, but the jolt of my neck being stretched like that sent me right to the hospital." Okay, well that's kind of in line with what he said to Taker at Tuesday in Texas, but in his second book, My Life Outside the Ring, Hogan says, "The Undertaker grabbed me again and flipped me over and dropped my head on the metal chair in the nastiest tombstone of all tombstones. That was all part of the plan. What wasn't part of the plan was how hot it was in the arena that night. By that point, I was sweating like a pig, so whether my body was too slippery to hold, or I didn't hang on tight enough, or we both just miscalculated, I'm not sure, but when he dropped that tombstone on me, my skull made contact with the chair. The jolt of the whole move threw my neck out." But yeah, no matter what actually happened, it is really crappy that Hogan could have easily wrecked The Undertaker's career for whatever silly yarn he was trying to spin. Number 2. A Pirate's Life. 1995 was a rough time for the WWE. The company was pushing Diesel as their top good guy world champion and doing that thing they love to do by taking someone who's cool and making him smile like a dork. The roster was so bad that for the first and only time ever, they had super brief intervals for the Royal Rumble. I guess you want to fast forward when you've got names like the Blue Brothers, Duke the Dumpster Droese, Aldo Montoya, Quang, Well Done. Gates were way down, WrestleMania was main evented by a retired football player, SummerSlam was main evented by friggin' Mabel. It was rough. Not to mention the controversy in Montreal. Not that controversy in Montreal. That was still a few years off. I'm talking about the fact that there seemed to be a different set of rules when wrestling companies visited Montreal. Now, there might be a standard show that they would do from town to town when they toured everywhere else, but in Montreal, they would do their best to make the French-Canadian wrestlers look like $1 million. For example, when WCW visited the City of Saints in 1997, the top bad guy in the industry, Hulk Hogan, lost to Jacques Rougeau cleanly in the main event. Mon Dieu. And mind you, this was when Rougeau was in a lower card tag team with former pirate Jean-Pierre Lafitte, known as the Amazing French Canadians. Today's equivalent of that would be something like, one half of Pretty Deadly, pinning Gunther. Heading into Montreal in September of 1995, the main event was set to be the world champion Diesel defending his title against local boy and then pirate Jean-Pierre Lafitte. At this point, Lafitte had worked his way up to being a serviceable mid-card talent, as he'd had some very good matches with Bret Hart, the inciting incident for those matches being the fact that Lafitte had stolen the Hitman's jacket. Wonder why business was so bad with hot storylines like that. As we mentioned earlier, the gates were way down, so in that era, paychecks were way down too. And in the build-up to the match, Lafitte had done his best to do local press and get the locals interested to the degree that they were looking at a gate that was 10 to 15% higher than usual. The plan that was handed down from Vince McMahon was to have the main event end with an inconclusive finish, probably with Lafitte winning by countout or disqualification, so they could come back next time and run the match back with a stipulation. However, for whatever reason, Shawn Michaels took issue with Lafitte not putting Diesel over clean. After a very heated discussion, the match was changed to a double countout. Shane Douglas would tell the tale that he was invited into a hotel room later that night that included Shawn Michaels, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, and others to discuss how Lafitte should be punished. At one point, Nash would pick up a phone and say he was just going to call McMahon and tell him to fire him, but Douglas would watch as the group eventually came to the decision to starve him out, meaning book him in a way that would affect his paycheck. Lafitte was gone from the company shortly thereafter. Years later in the Sporting News, Lafitte would say about Shawn Michaels and the Clique, "The main issue for me is that these guys were playing around with the livelihoods of so many people, and they didn't care about what financial pressures people were under. The amount of wrestlers they kept down or got fired just so they could keep the money and the spotlight on themselves was something that I thought needed to be spoken up about." Fortunately, this would be the last time Shawn Michaels would ever cause number 3. It's time. Early on in the 90s edition of the WCW vs. WWE war, it seemed like the big talents were all headed in one direction, to WCW. Hulk Hogan, Macho Man Randy Savage, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, Lex Luger. So if you were a WWE fan, it was nice to see a big talent headed your way. And in 1996, that guy was Vader. Vader, who enjoyed a dominant run in WCW, winning their world title on 3 occasions and putting on some excellent hard-hitting bouts. He arrived in the then World Wrestling Federation with much fanfare, building heat by taking out the beloved company legend Gorilla Monsoon. It all seemed like he was being built up properly for a world title feud against the company's golden boy and noted pirate hater, Shawn Michaels. But alas, while late 90s Shawn Michaels is one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, he was also one of the most difficult people to work with backstage. Shawn and Vader would be programmed together in the summer of '96, leading to a title match in the main event of SummerSlam. But the Heartbreak Kid took real exception to Vader's style of hard-hitting wrestling. Vader's manager Jim Cornette would have this to say about it during a U-Shoot interview. Shawn Michaels is used to everybody, or was used to everybody, catering to him, and also was used to people working with him a lot lighter. And I remember one time it was in fucking Tulsa. It was at a house show in Tulsa. Leon's got him by the hair, and he's fucking peppering him with rights, boom, boom, boom. And all of a sudden I see Shawn gets out of it and grabs some kind of hold, and there's a conversation. And I'm like, what the fuck? And then they go to the finish a couple minutes later. Leon rolls. Of course, Leon lost. That's another thing. Big monster, you know. Frankenstein kicked a few villagers' ass first to get over. Leon rolls out, and he's crying. Vader said, Shawn Michaels told me if I yanked his hair that way, that'd be my job, and he's going to get me fired. Now, the reality of pro wrestling is that some guys work light and some guys work stiff, but just like any professional environment, you communicate. Apparently, Shawn's way of doing this was throwing your clout around and threatening someone's job. Things would not get better for Vader at SummerSlam. The duo had set up a moment where Shawn would drop an elbow on Vader from the top rope, and Vader would roll out of the way. A confused Vader forgot what to do, which led to Shawn Michaels landing on his feet and kicking Vader in the head. Hard. All this while he berated him in front of the capacity crowd. This event, partnered with other events, led to the end of what was supposed to be a very big program for Vader. He was scheduled to work with Michaels at that year's Survivor Series in Madison Square Garden, where it was believed that he was going to win the WWF title. From there, the December pay-per-view was actually named after him, with the subhead being It's Time. And then, he'd have a final rematch with Michaels at the 1997 Royal Rumble in the Alamo Dome, where Michaels would get the title back. Sid would take Vader's place. In 1996, Shawn Michaels was good, but he wasn't get great matches out of Sid good. Maybe nobody's that good. So at the end of the day, Vader was punished, and honestly, having to watch those Sid matches, fans were kind of punished too. Number 4, Shirt Tails. Today, Stone Cold Steve Austin and Jeff Jarrett seem to be buddies. Jarrett has even showed up on Stone Cold's podcast, but during the Attitude Era, when Austin's word was law, the duo did not get along. When Jeff Jarrett returned to the WWE in 1997 from WCW, it's believed that a deciding factor was the pitch that Jarrett would have a long-running feud with top dog Steve Austin. Maybe somebody should have told Steve that in advance because he shot that idea down quickly. On the October 20th, 1997 episode of Monday Night Raw, Jarrett came to the ring for a shoot promo. First, he'd call out Eric Bischoff for mistreating him during his time with WCW. Then he'd tell Vince he can stick With My Baby Tonight up his butt. With My Baby Tonight was the country song Jarrett pretended to sing during his previous stint in WWE. Also, With My Baby Tonight is actually a pretty catchy tune, and that's coming from somebody who doesn't really care for country music. Oh, and who says stick it up your butt? It's the Attitude Era, Jeff. Loosen up a little. Anyhow, after all of that, Jeff promptly shot himself in the foot when it came to that big money feud he was hoping for. He'd say this about Steve Austin. Now here's a guy who's lowered himself to shaving his head and coming here every week, not once or twice, but 10 or 15 times and saying the word ass. That's right, saying the word ass just to get a reaction, just to get noticed. Stone Cold, you will always be the ringmaster. Yeah, man, you should say butt, like a real wrestler. Okay, that probably isn't what Jarrett got in trouble. What really set Austin off was this. And as far as your blasphemous merchandise, that offends me. Austin 3:16 offends me because what you're doing is ripping off the Bible to put money in your pockets. Yeah, you can call Austin out for a feud, but when you call out his white-hot line of t-shirts and other merch, you're affecting his wallet. In a blog post for InsidePulse.com, WWE writer Vince Russo would say, Steve was on the other side of the curtain waiting for him when he came back. Steve was freaking furious. I mean, his bald head was blood red. As soon as Jeff came to the back, Steve was verbally all over him, holding nothing back. He told Jeff that he was messing with his livelihood and that he didn't appreciate it. After the explosive tongue lashing, Steve tracked me down. He gave me clear instructions to never book him with that SOB. Russo would wait 6 months after this incident in the hopes that things had calmed down, that we'd pitch a feud between Austin and Jarrett yet again. Russo would say, when he arrived at TV, Steve pulled me in a room and read me the riot act. Citing everything he had told me verbatim 6 months prior, Steve hadn't forgotten one word of our conversation, not one. After apologizing because he was right and I was wrong, I changed the show on the spot to meet Steve's wishes. Not content to just avoid Jarrett in the ring, Austin would rip into him during an interview with Get in the Ring Radio saying, Jarrett wasn't physical enough, he didn't hit the ropes hard enough, and it wasn't a case of me being able to bring him up, more a case of him bringing me down because of how hot I was. I'm not out there UFC shoot fighting, but Jesus Christ, lay some stuff in on me, bust my mouth, whatever. He can't hit the ropes hard enough to bust an egg. I had a violent physical work style. I mean, Jesus, you want to work with me? Bring it. Other points of contention between the two were the fact that Austin spent his early days in Jeff Jarrett's father's territory in Tennessee and wasn't thrilled about how he was treated. Fortunately, it looks like the duo is fine now, but missing out on an Attitude Era main event run with Steve Austin, that must have been heartbreaking. Number 5. Fired. Ken Kennedy is one of the great what-ifs in professional wrestling history. He seemed to be a throwback to the Attitude Era with his wrestling style and his over-the-top promos. I think a pretty decent comparison today would be LA Knight. They just carry themselves a little bit differently. It's kind of tough to put your finger on it. And he was set for big things, but those big things kept falling through. He won the Money in the Bank ladder match at WrestleMania 23 and made the unique announcement that he didn't intend to cash in until the main event of the following year's WrestleMania, which is an idea I absolutely love. I'm shocked they haven't recycled it with somebody else. Kennedy would get injured in the summer of that year, and they'd have Edge beat him for the briefcase so he could take the belt from an injured Undertaker. This proved to be extremely short-sighted as the injury wasn't as severe as they originally thought, and he was back in action shortly afterwards. And even if the injury was that bad, he would have had plenty of time to rehab before WrestleMania. Kennedy would also be slated for a huge angle in which it would be revealed that he was Vince McMahon's illegitimate son, setting him up for a WrestleMania showdown against Triple H for control of the company. This storyline was cut short when Kennedy was implicated in a steroid scandal. Needless to say, it was a really rocky road for Kennedy, and he started to get a reputation as someone that it was going to be tough to push due to his frequent injuries and questionable choices. Now in 2009, he returned from an injury, ready to get his career back on track, and his first match back was on the May 25th, 2009 episode of Monday Night Raw. This evening was notable for two reasons. First, Vince McMahon was furious with Denver Nuggets owner Stan Kroenke because Raw was switched from the Pepsi Center in Denver to Los Angeles because of Game 4 of the Lakers-Nuggets series. Originally, that date was held by the WWE. McMahon countered this by insulting and pushing around a fake Stan during the show and dressing up the main event good guys in Laker jerseys while the heels wore Nuggets jerseys. Haha, super subtle. During the entrances, Lawler would wear a jersey number that would highlight the age difference between him and his current girlfriend, and Cena would show that he might not know how to shoot a basketball. The match itself was relatively uneventful, save for the moment where Ken Kennedy gave a back suplex to Randy Orton. Doesn't look like anything out of the ordinary, but Randy was clearly pissed. Backstage after the bout, an enraged Orton complained to WWE management, and Kennedy was released a few days later. In an interview with Pro Wrestling Report on 540 ESPN Radio, Kennedy would explain the incident saying, "He made such a big stink about me supposedly dropping on his head. He literally blew up in front of all the talent, including Vince and Stephanie, and began to lecture me about how I had to be more careful. And his health was very important. Just didn't make sense to me. His neck never even touched the mat, which makes me wonder why he even went to the trainer's room to get his neck taped up. He was so injured that he went on to wrestle 3 nights in Mexico." Orton would respond on his now-defunct website saying, "As far as dropping me on my head, he did. He never got to see all 4 camera angles of him doing it. I did. Plus, the left side of my neck down to my trap was sore all week in Mexico. I did tell Ken that he shouldn't be dropping me on my head with such a simple, basic move. He never said sorry, and even called me a liar after the match. I remember looking at him in disbelief, and yes, I did tell management I did not want to work with him after that. Who wouldn't? That's my side." Now, usually these stories end up with the fired party eventually returning to the company, but Ken Kennedy hasn't been on WWE TV since. Number 6. Life's a Sitch. Alright, before we dive into this one, I need everyone to know that we're going to be taking a lot of this information from the pages of Tammy Sunny Stitch's biography of Star Shattered, so just take what you're about to hear with just all, not a grain of salt, like all the salt you can handle. Don't hurt yourself, and don't worry, we're going to make sure we get both sides of the story. Widely regarded as WWE's first true diva, Sunny was known for her charisma, beauty, and ability to engage audiences, playing a pivotal role in popular storylines and managing several high-profile tag teams, including the Body Donnas, the Smoking Guns, and LOD 2000. And if you want an idea of how popular she was back then, in 1996 she was named the most downloaded celebrity on all of AOL. Oh, and here's an example of what it was like downloading a picture of a celebrity back in 1996. Sunny was released from WWE in 1998 following several incidents, including missed appearances and failing to attend scheduled interviews. Rumors also circulated that she had significant backstage tension with Sable, whose rising popularity with the WWE Universe allegedly contributed to further conflicts. Sunny and Candida would spend the next year or so in ECW before making the jump to WCW in the spring of 2000. This stay would be very short-lived as Tammy would be suspended when the injectable painkiller Nubane was found in the women's locker room. According to Tammy's book, she would deny taking the drug and would even take a drug test to prove that they weren't her drugs, although Bischoff would put her on suspension while waiting for the test results. Sitch would say, "I walked into the locker room and almost immediately was pulled aside by Tori Wilson and Stacy Keibler. They asked me if I was okay. Yeah, but I'm suspended until my urine comes back negative," I said. "They said they had heard what happened and they knew who set me up. Kimberly Page." Now, if you're unfamiliar with the wrestling company that died 24 years ago, Kimberly was the wife of former WCW champion Diamond Dallas Page and the leader of the Nitro Girls Dance Squad. Sitch considered Kimberly to be a bit of a snob, and seeing as Kimberly was the top female heel in the company at the time, assumed that Kimberly was probably worried that Tammy was going to try to steal her spot. Don't worry though, it gets weirder. Tammy would say it was also very well known that Eric Bischoff and DDP were best friends, and their wives were friends as well. Too friendly, in fact, because it was also a well-known fact that Eric and Dallas would wife swap. Yep, they were swingers. Kimberly was much better looking than Eric's wife, so she had him wrapped around her little finger. Kimberly went to Eric and told him it was my new bane, hoping to get me fired. That's a lot to take in from such a little paragraph, but we're still not done. Tammy would tell her buddy Scott Steiner what happened, and Steiner would charge into the women's locker room to verbally lambast Kimberly, and she would quit right on the spot. From there, Tammy's test would come back negative, but she was fired a few weeks later anyway. Now, the other side of the story is that Kimberly has no idea what Tammy is talking about. In an interview with Hannibal TV, Page said, "I can tell you right now that I was not even there. I was working that day. I was out in the arena, as I was very, very well known to do. We would have Nitro Girls rehearsal, and we'd finish up. We'd have a couple hours of dead time, and I'd sit out in the arena and read a book. And that is what I was doing. I came back into the locker room, and a syringe had already been discovered in the bathroom. I wasn't even there for it, and Jeannie had already been notified, so I was just there and saw it. I don't know how it got turned into I ratted her out. I was the one who found it, because none of that is true." So what's the truth? I don't know, but I do like the idea of Tori Wilson and Stacy Keibler running around the backstage area stirring up drama. Oh, and speaking of Dallas Page, number 7, Buried Alive. A lot has been written about the WCW invasion of WWE back in 2001, and one of the reasons it ultimately didn't work is because it failed to create the dream matches that we had all hoped to see. The majority of WCW's big stars had long-term contracts, and it was more worth it for them to stay at home and collect a fat paycheck than it was to take a buyout for less money and sign with the WWE. That's why we wouldn't see Hulk Hogan, Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, Goldberg, and others for quite some time. Far too late to save the floundering invasion angle. But Diamond Dallas Page was one of those guys. The 3-time WCW champion was downright giddy to finally get to go to the WWE and be a part of what he thought would be the biggest angle of all time. Oh, poor Page. Page was immediately put into a program with The Undertaker where it was revealed that he had been stalking The Undertaker's wife, Sarah. And I tell you, the only way this feud could have been more one-sided is if it was a damn Mobius strip. Boom! Mathematics reference. For weeks, we just watched The Undertaker getting the best of arguably the biggest WCW star to make the jump. It was either him or Booker T. The worst indignity coming when Taker's wife would get a pinfall victory over him at Raw. So what was the big deal? Well, in his book, The Hardcore Truth, Bob Sparky Thurman Plug Holly would say this about Page. He had star potential and he could have been a lot bigger in the WWF than he ended up being, but he screwed the pooch for himself on that deal. He would sit down and write out the whole match in great detail. It was unbelievable. He even tried to dictate what Taker would do in the ring at one point. That's why he ended up on TV getting pinned by Taker's wife. Unless you're Vince, you don't tell Taker what to do, ever. Page's in-ring career never really recovered from his run with The Undertaker. He'd pivot to being more of a comedy character, but his days in the main event were done. All for the horrific crime of writing down the match before it happened. Something a big star would never do, you know. Like Bret Hart at SummerSlam 92, Randy Savage at WrestleMania 3. Well, there's our list. Did we forget any other wrestlers who tried to sabotage other wrestlers' career? If so, please leave them in the comments section below. Also, if you enjoy this, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and insane elbow that notification bell. Until next time, I'm Senior Siete for 7 Wrestling saying bye-bye.